Sorry.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. We oppose the national adoption of a federal cap and trade policy outlined in the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009. First of all, although carbon dioxide emissions do play a role in global warming and health hazards, there are other greenhouse gas emissions that the United States should be worried about. Second, we should be doubtful about this policy because there is no guarantee it would work to effectively combat the dangerous effects of climate change. Unlike a present policy, which we already know is effective in reducing unwanted man-made greenhouse gas emissions. Now first, we have to take into account that we are unable to regulate even the most prominent cause for global warming because it occurs naturally. My partner Sarah will explain this further. The opposing side mentioned that the United States is responsible for about 20% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions and that we are obligated to reduce that 20% and demonstrate leadership. However, according to Marty Fieldstein of the Washington Post, since the United States' share of CO2 is less than 25% and is projected to decline as China and other developing nations grow, a 15% will fall in the U.S. CO2 in the United States. CO2 will lower global levels by 4%. The U.S. should wait until there is a global agreement on CO2. The opposing side also mentioned how the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009 is a policy to only regulate carbon emissions, but is carbon dioxide the only greenhouse gas that causes global warming? We acknowledge that carbon dioxide is somewhat of a prominent greenhouse gas that affects climate change and is linked to health problems, but is not linked to health problems. On the other hand, we think that the United States should as well concentrate on regulating other possibly more dangerous greenhouse gases. According to the EPA, and something our opposing side failed to mention, there are 6 major greenhouse gases at the root of the climate change problem, and they are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. So why is it that the proposed policy they're advocating for does not cover any of the other harmful greenhouse gases besides carbon dioxide, when they are as well an important contributing factor to global warming? For example, in the World Journal of Microbiology and Biotechnology, it is stated that as a contributor to global warming, methane is second only to carbon dioxide and accounts for 16% of all greenhouse gas emissions globally. The EPA states that the ability of methane to retain heat, otherwise known as global warming potential, is 21 times more than carbon dioxide. Sarah will as well elaborate on this point. Now, when talking about health, we think that carbon emissions are not as dangerous and hazardous to us and other greenhouse emissions. Furthermore, in order to reduce CO2 emissions does not mean that we have to implement a policy which we are unsure about. This brings me to our second point. Why should we adopt a trust in new federal policy in which we are unsure if it would be effective in reducing the harmful effects of global warming? Or in other words, how Kieran and Sugley commented in a magazine titled Culture Change. Would you flip a coin to determine whether hundreds of thousands of species will live or die? How about whether hundreds of millions of people are displaced and forced to live in misery? Sarah and I think that this is precisely what the U.S. will be doing if we adopt the American Clean Energy and Security Act. According to Sugley, leading scientists such as NASA's James Hansen warn that the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere must be reduced to no more than 350 parts per million. When we take a closer look at the proposed bill, we could see that it would not meet that requirement. According to a newspaper editorial on the Brattleboro Reformer, ACES, which is the proposed bill, will allow atmospheric carbon emissions to increase to more than 450 parts per million. Far more than the 350 parts per million level the leading scientists say must be reached, and soon, to combat the climate crisis. At that level, Sugley points out, scientists say that there is a 50-50% chance that global warming will cause catastrophic impacts to humans and other species. We think, instead of being uncertain about our future, it is best for the U.S. to keep a policy that we already have, a policy that already works in reducing harmful greenhouse gases. The opposition mentioned how the 1990 Clean Air Act under the regulation of the EPA is considered to be one of the greatest successes, while utilizing the cap and trade system to reduce sulfur dioxide and other greenhouse emissions. We could first see a success by looking back at its history. For example, by 1995, 5 years after it was implemented, nationwide acid rain emissions had fallen by 3 million tons, well ahead of the schedule required by law. The Clean Air Act has furthermore successfully reduced air pollution for 40 years because it establishes clear, non-discretionary, scientifically based, and equally standards. Sucking comes out. For example, according to the EPA, operating permits include information on which pollutants are being released, how much may be released, and what kinds of steps the source's owner or operator is required to take to reduce the pollution. Some of you may be asking, so why can't the proposed bill simply work together with the Clean Air Act in order to decrease the negative effect of carbon emissions and the other dangerous greenhouse gas emissions? But something else that position did not fail to mention is that by implementing the American Clean Energy Act and Security Act of 2009 will make the Clean Air Act disappear. We agree with Suckling when he says that any new global warming solution should work together with the Clean Air Act to preserve the lives and health of our children and fellow species. The American Clean Energy and Security Act instead repeals the Clean Energy Act's ability to regulate critical polluters, instead allowing numerous coal-fired power plants to be built without any additional emission reduction requirements for more than a decade into the future. In summary, even though the main purpose of the proposed policy by the opposing side is to reduce the harmful effects of climate change, there is a large risk that it would not work. It fails to take into account other dangerous greenhouse gas emissions. And although we already have an existing policy, the Clean Air Act, which works to reduce those hazardous gases, the proposed policy would eliminate. In conclusion, we firmly oppose the national adoption of a federal cap and trade policy outlined in the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009. Thank you.